We are discussing now an ear the Aimbo Zakanim. We had earlier regarding an Ori Miklat. As we know, the Masechta here, we're discussing Ori Miklat, cities of refuge. That's what the parak is about. In the parasha that the parasha that we've just had this past week, this past Shabbat, and we spoke about if a city does not have Zakanim. Rabbi Loza said a city that doesn't have Zakanim, doesn't have some interpret a court. There's no Bezdin in a city, meaning if let's say the Ori Miklat, the place of refuge, there were 48. There were 6 main cities, and there was another 42 cities. All the cities of the Levium also served as the Ori Miklat, as a place of refuge, except it wasn't rent-free. The 6 that the Torah talk about, the 3 that we spoke about, the 3 on the east side of the Jordan, the other side of the Jordan, on the west side, those were free. You get free rent. You know, if a person killed unintentionally, you could go in there, no payment. But the other 42 cities of Levium, you would have to pay. But it served as a city of refuge from the Goel Adam. The relative would not be able to come in and kill him once he comes into any of those 48 cities. And the discussion was, if the city does not have a court, does it lose its status of serving as the Ori Miklat? Does it have to have, is a prerequisite for an Ori Miklat to serve as Ori Miklat, has to have a court, a Bezdin? If it doesn't have a Bezdin, so there's a machloket in the Gemara whether it could serve as a Ori Miklat or loses its status. You have to have a court in town. No court in town, not able to serve as a Ori Miklat. That's 2 opinions in the Gemara. So the Gemara is bringing other places in the Torah where the question is whether having a court. See, the question is when the Torah talks about Zakanim. Zakanim is, we're going to translate it, the court, the elders, the one that runs like you had the Sanhedrin. When the Torah talks about them in connection with certain mitzvot, does the Torah mean to say you have to have them in order for it to take effect? Or does the Torah mean this is the ideal situation, that there should be a bezdin, there should be a court there? But if there is no court there, it's still the laws would still take effect. So that's what the Gemara is going to be bringing, different places in the Torah where the Torah spoke about the Canaan, spoke about the elders, spoke about the court, and that's what the Gemara is discussing. Does it mean that you have to have it? It's a must. Good morning, Jaime. Morning. Do you have to have the court? But if you don't have the court, those laws of that particular section of the Torah doesn't apply. Or when the Torah says it has a court, it's talking about the ideal situation that there's a mitzvah to have the court. But if there is no court in that place, it still would apply. So that was a discussion of an Ori Miklat, a city of refuge. You have to have a court in place in order for the city of refuge to act as a city of refuge. And that was a discussion yesterday about a Ben Sora Moreh. Someone comes from a certain town, there's a certain child, he's 13 and he steals and he eats meat, steals from his parents and he eats meat and he drinks wine and he's warned and he continues doing this type of activity. The Torah talks about the rebellious child, and the Torah talks in connection with the rebellious child that you go to the Zikna Iro, that it talks about there are elders, there's a court in town. So does that mean to say that the only way the laws of Ben Sora or Moreh will only apply only if there happens to be a court that resides in the city where the kid is the rebellious? Or even if there's no court in that city, you could take the case to a different city. That was the Gemara's discussion yesterday. Today, the Gemara is having a discussion about a third case regarding Egla Rufa. Someone finds a person died, you don't know, was murdered, you don't know who killed him. So there's a whole discussion, what do we do in such a case? So the Torah says, if you find someone murdered, you don't know who murdered him, you take 5 of the greatest rabbis in the world, 5 of the greatest rabbis from the great Sanhedrin, from not from Washington, D.C., Lahavdil, Elif Avdalot, but from the real court, the court in the Yerushalayim, in the Beit HaMikdash. 5 of the greatest rabbis on earth come to the town. They come to the town, they do the measuring. They come to measure which is the closest city to that this murder took place. Like, obvious question is, what do you need the 5 greatest rabbis to come? Anybody can do the measuring. I could even do the measuring. I'm like, you don't need the biggest rabbis in town. Obviously, the Torah, perhaps the Torah wants to show how big of a deal a death of someone, a Jew being murdered. We're going to get the greatest rabbis involved. They're going to come to town, and they're going to be involved in this process. They're going to do the what? It's a statement to the community. I think the Sefer Chinuch has a very fascinating comment on it, that he says when the 5 greatest rabbis come to town, everybody goes out to see the rabbi. You don't always get them coming to your town. And now, so there's a lot of talk. Why are the rabbis here? Why are they coming? There was a murder. Oh, people are talking about the murder. Maybe then maybe they'll find out. Maybe there are witnesses, and then it will help even find in solving the murder in a certain sense. How do you like that? But the fact that there's a lot of discussion about about this murder.
Isn't it to level a degree of responsibility on the people collectively that someone was killed and no one knows?
Yeah, yes, and that's maybe that could explain why the town, they give it over to the town. The elders of that town have to take the responsibility and process this. Make Egel Arufa. They got to go ahead and take a calf, and they got to chop off its head. They need atonement. There is a responsibility on the town, on the city. They have to look at themselves and say, maybe we haven't done something right. They have to make a statement to analyze themselves. And they're going to say, we did not cause this death. They're going to say that we let the guy leave. It's not that we let the guy go without food. We let the guy go without escorting. We escorted this person that got killed was taken care of properly by the community. And the community has to look at themselves and look themselves in the mirror. Did we do something, and be honest with themselves? But then there's a need for atonement. And the pasuk says, if someone from the community if someone near their community gets killed, there's something the atonement is needed. So now the question is, if the city that's closest to the murder, if the city doesn't contain its own court, doesn't have its own court, would we say, and the Torah talks about its own court, because the Torah talks about the Ziknei Ha'ir, the elders, the court of that town takes over. Well, what about if the town doesn't have the court? Do we say it's brought to another court, that another court is going to deal with it, or deal with the situation? Or do we say that if this city that's closest to where the murder took place doesn't have a court, the laws of Egel Arufa don't apply? If there's no court in town, we don't do this whole process. There's a very beautiful idea, by the way, by the story of Egel Arufa. There's a mitzvah in the Torah that the place that you chop off the head of this egel, of this calf, you're not allowed to work this place, and you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to work. It's a prohibition, and the Sefer Chinuch says it applies today. If you could identify in the Holy Land today a place that they did this Egel Arufa, where they chopped off the head of this calf to atone for this murder, you would not be able to plant in that place today or work that piece of land in the Holy Land today. The only reason why you could work all places in the Holy Land, maybe not during the Shemitah year, but the regular year, is because why? We go basa rov. We go after the majority. The majority of the place of Israel never had a place, did not have the chopping of the head of the Egel Arufa in that place. Therefore, you could plant and plow anywhere. But if you would be able to identify where in Eretz Yisrael this happened, you wouldn't be able to plant or plow, work that place morning today. And I think, what did you say? I would have to look up regarding other types of work. Clearly, what would be permitted, what would not be permitted. But what's the idea? The idea is somebody's life was cut short. Somebody's life was murdered. And the idea of the murder took away the opportunity for that person to be productive. And what it means, and Sifsei Chacham explains what it means productive. That person could have done Torah mitzvot. The person had the ability to create fruit. And what was the fruit they could have? They could have done mitzvot. As a result of the
Good morning.
person, good morning, Mike. As a
Morning, Robert.
result, morning, as a result that somebody killed this person, the person's ability to be productive was taken away. So we're going to remember this tragedy forever, that forever and ever you never could plant and be productive in that spot. That the Egel Arufa was cut off. Because what happened to the world, there was a loss of productivity as a result of this person not able to do mitzvot, and therefore we're going to remember that forever. So that's something, and therefore we use an animal, an egel that never produced any fruit, never worked a day in its life, never produced any fruit. That's the egel that's going to be used to atone for this for this murder. So that's a little bit about what the fascinating ideas behind this story of Egel Arufa. So, say what? Right. It's very tragic, but most probably it's more tragic when someone else murdered that person. It's a more tragic situation. But I once said that the problem is today we live in a situation that many people sign themselves up to the same result that's happening. They live a life without Torah, without mitzvot. So the tragedy is living in Arufat. Good morning, Yosef Atzadik. It's a living tragedy. The tragedy. What? Yeah, they're not being productive as Jews. And therefore we have to, what do you say, Mr. Safdie? Okay, let's see the Gemara. It's a city that doesn't have a court. And then in that city was a city that they found a dead body. Someone was murdered in that city. So now the question is, in general, we give over to the city, to the elders of the city, the responsibility to process the Egel Arufa, this calf when there's a murder. Do we say if the city doesn't have a court, this laws don't apply, and we don't give another court nearby the responsibility? Or do we say this law still apply? It's just ideally the case is there's a mitzvah that the court of the city is the one who generally will take care of it. But if the city doesn't have a court, it doesn't hold back from the processing. We gave a mashal on there's a mitzvah of tzitzit. There's another mitzvah of tchelet, of the blue string, of the blue, one of the strings should be dyed with blue. What happens if you don't have tchelet? The mitzvah, even though you don't have, there's a mitzvah of tchelet, but it does not hold back the mitzvah of tzitzit from being performed. We still have the mitzvah of tzitzit. We still get the mitzvah of tzitzit without the tchelet. We don't get that mitzvah of tchelet, but we still get the mitzvah of tzitzit. So too over here. The fact that there's no court in town, we missed out that mitzvah of having the court being involved with it. But still, the mitzvah still applies. The show must go on. It has to still take place, and the processing of the Egel Arufa still has to take place. So that is the discussion of the Gemara. When the Torah says, you go to the elders of the city. If the Torah says you have to go to the elders of the city, does that mean if there's no elders, these laws don't apply? Or not? Or even if there's no elders, but somehow the processing has to happen anyways. That is the question is that clear, Ms. Safdie? That's the question of the Gemara. Sometimes in life we don't meet all the ideal requirements, but even when you don't meet all the ideal requirements, doesn't mean that's still has to happen. Yeah. Right. So it's true. So the rabbis from the corner washing the court, said head and Agodel, they're coming. But now the question is, after they come, then the city rabbi's court is supposed to take over. Now, but the city doesn't have a court. So now do you say, does it still happen? Does the neighboring city take over? Well, no. If this city has no court, it doesn't happen. So look what the Gemara says. 3 lines from the bottom. In the art scroll, it's 10b4 on the right side. Ir she'ein bo zakenim. A city that there's no elders. Rav Ami and Rav Asi. There's a machloket between Rav Ami and Rav Asi. Charoma mevia egla rufa. One says that they still bring the egla rufa is still brought. The processing will be done anyways. You'll still, if a person was murdered and there's no court in that town, so the neighboring court will take care of it. It'll be taken care of. Or perhaps maybe the leaders of the community who are not dayanim, who are not court will take care of it. Somebody's going to take care of the laws of Egla Rufa. It's not going to be omitted because there's no court in this town. However, that's the first opinion. And one says they do not bring an Egla Rufa. The law doesn't apply. There's no what Jaime spoke about atonement for before that maybe perhaps you could explain it that if there's a court in town, there's a bezdin in town, the rabbis have the responsibility, the court have the responsibility, and if there's no rabbis in town, there's no court in town, so there's no people to really have that put the responsibility on. Because the leaders of the city are generally responsible, but if you don't have a court, so therefore you're living in a city that's not really, there's laws about every city, certain amount of people need to have a court. So if you don't have the court, so maybe there's no one to really hold so responsible, perhaps. They don't bring an egla rufa. Now the Gemara explains. The opinion that it says you do not bring an egla rufa, there's nothing to be done. There's no atonement process that's being done if there's no court in this town. Be'inan zikne ha'irahi. The pasuk says the elders of that town. You go to the elders of that town, the court of that town. There's no court in this town. There's no court in this town, so you're off the hook. Veleka, there's no court. However, Mandi Amma Meviegla Rufa, the other one who says that you do bring an Egla Rufa, because why does he hold? Because he holds mitzvah ba'alma. When the pasuk says you go to the rabbis, the court of that town, that's the mitzvah. That's the ideal mitzvah that you're supposed to do. You're supposed to go ahead and go to the rabbis of that town, the court of the town. But if there's no court in this town, if you go to a court in a different town to deal with it, it's the mitzvah ba'alma, but it doesn't hold back from performing the mitzvah. When it comes to Sukkot, you have the 4 minim, the aravot, the hadassim, lulav, and etrog. If you're missing one of them, there's no mitzvah. You have to have all of them. You have to have all 4. But that's the question of here. If you're missing this, sometimes if you're missing an ingredient, it's over. You don't got it. And sometimes maybe you might be missing a certain ingredient, but it's still performance. So that's what the Gemara says over here. Okay, now comes the Gemara and discusses a little bit about Ori Miklat that's mentioned in the Sefer Yoshua. What does it say? As you remember, Moshe Rabbeinu designated the 3 cities on the east side of the Jordan, and Yeshua, when he came to Eretz Yisrael, he designated the other 3 and also the other 42 cities are for the Leviim. So the Gemara is noticing the language that's used in Sefer Yoshua. Amar Rav Chama bar Chanina, the last line of the page. Livnei ma ne'emar pashat rotzchim b'loshan azah. Now we're on Yud Aleph Omer Aleph, 11a, 11a1, Mabruk Mazel Tov, we're on a new daf. Why is the language, when it discusses the parsha of rotzchim, of going to exile, people who killed unintentionally, it says it's written in a strong language. B'loshen azah. Now, if you look at the top Rashi, the first Rashi on the page, on the right corner, Yud Aleph Amen Aleph, B'loshen azah, B'chol Yehoshua, throughout Sefer Yeshua, Ksiv Vayomer Hashem. Hashem said to Yoshua, V'kan nemar vayidaber. He spoke. There's a different amira. When you say he said is softer than speaking. Speaking is a stronger tone. It's a stronger tone. And the Gemara is trying to understand why the change. Why specifically in this spot is the Torah changing from only in this, it talks about, what do you say, Dr. Navid? Vayoma to Vayidaber. There's a very famous statement, morning Jake, by Matan Torah. By Matan Torah, when it came to the Har Sinai, it says, Kol Soma leBeit Yaakov v'Sageit leBnei Yisrael. It says, Beit Yaakov are the women. How do you talk to the women of Israel? Kol Somar, soft. You talk to the women soft talk. They don't need hard talk, tough talk. But the men, v'Sageit, you got to talk things that are tough, like a gid, like a sin or something that's dvarim koshim kegidin. You have to know who your audience is. You have to know who you're talking to. Certain people, the men, you got to talk to the men about the punishments that will keep them in line. The women, certain or whatever, you got to talk to them a little stronger. The women don't need that talk. They need a different type of talk, right? Different approaches for different people. So we see the difference between Omer, Somar, and over there with Sagei. So here the question is, why the switch? The Ksiv, we're now on the first line. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Leima. Hashem says to Moshe, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael. Sorry, Vaydaber Hashem el Yeshua Leima. Hashem spoke to Yeshua. Daber el bnei Yisrael. Speak. So it says Vaydaber Hashem el Yeshua. He spoke to Yeshua. Daber el bnei Yisrael. Tnu lachem orim miklan asher dibrati aleichem. He says, you should go ahead and place the Ori Miklat. So, that I spoke to you. I told you about I said in the Torah that we just learned about, like Mr. Haber said, we learned about the mitzvah of separating cities of refuge. So Hashem says to Yeshua, tell the people we got to separate those cities. So why the usage of the word daber? So the Gemara says, "V'nei shehein Torah." So because it's a mitzvah from the Torah. So what does that mean? So look at the Rashi, the second line of the page. Rashi, Shehein Torah. Avoshara mirod she'oma lo'oma dova l'kayim mitzvah ksuva b'Torah chutz mezu. This is the only time that Hashem is telling Yoshua to fulfill a mitzvah that's written in the Torah. The only time that Hashem is telling Yoshua about a certain mitzvah that's already written in the Torah, this is the time. And because this is the only time it's for something that's written in the Torah, so therefore he gave it extra strength. Okay, so the Gemara is gonna discuss it for whatever reason is, there might be a criticism of why Hashem spoke to Yeshua in the certain language, because Yeshua did not do it yet. Some say Yeshua, for whatever reason, delayed, and therefore Hashem is telling him, you got to go ahead and do it. And because it's from the Torah, he used a language, a language of diber, of strength. Now, so the Gemara says, Lememra, are you going to say that Dibur is Lashon Kasher? Is Dibur where do we find, how do we know that Dibur is connotes a strong language? How do we know that?
Rabbi, I think the portion of this week, when the God says to Moses, Daber Bnei Israel, and not Vayomer El Moshe, I remember the Rabbi Fachi lecture from Sunday. He was talking about exactly about this point. What's the point of the difference between Vaydaber or Vayomer?
Very good, very good. There's no such thing in the Torah that when two things are different, there's a reason. It's not just that, sometimes you say, but you translate Vayidaber, he spoke, Vayomer, and he said. They sound very similar, Vayidaber, Vayomer, but there's no such thing. If the Torah uses two different words, that means it's a difference. There's no such thing that it just uses, like we have in English, something called a synonym. But a synonym is not the same. But the Torah, it could be the fact that the Torah uses this word here, even if it sounds alike, but there's a different reason. It's not by chance. It's not that the Torah uses two of the same words to describe the same thing. If they're two different words, then there's some difference in the language. So the Gemara says, "Lememra, the whole makom, the whole dibur lashon kasher." So it was in. Yes, I will show you that dibur is. How do we find where do we find that it means something that means something strong? Kemo the ksiv, we found dibur ha'ish adonai haaretz itanu kasher. We find that the brothers said when they told Yaakov, about Yosef, right? When the brothers came back to Yaakov and they did not know it was Yosef, right? What did they say? They said, Dibur ha'ish Adonai haaretz, the man in Egypt, he spoke with us, kashot, tough talk, right? He accused us of being spies, and he was very tough with us. So therefore, we see in connection with the word diber was kashot. Good morning, Ariel. He spoke with us tough words. So we see clearly that the use of the word diber is connected with kasher, with something that's very tough. And the Gemara says, what do you mean? Vatanya, we have a braita. Now the Gemara is going to question this, what we just said about diber being connoting a tough language, a tough talk. Vatanya, we learned in the braita, nidbaru. It says, Ad nidbaru yirei Hashem, ish ara'eu. It says when people who are God-fearing speak one to the other, by Yakshev Hashem, the pasuk says Hashem listens to what they say and he follows what they say. So we see, and we know, Einid Baru, the Braita says the way that these God-fearing people talk to each other, how do they talk to each other? They talk with each other gently, softly, benachat, like it says, Divrei Chachamim, benachat nishmaim. Wise people, they talk softly, talk gently, they don't talk tough, they don't talk loud, they talk soft. So it says, Nidbru ein lashon nachat, something soft. V'cheinu omer, as it says, Yad ben amim tachteinu. Hashem will lead all the generations in the future. In the time of Mashiach, all the nations will be under us. They will be humbled. They will be humble to us. So we see it's the idea of humility. It's the idea of softness. Person's humble, is gentle. So we see that diber is not a language of toughness. It's a language of associated with softness. Yadber amim tachtenu nidbru yirei Hashem. So the Gemara says there's a difference. Daber l'chud and yadber l'chud. The word nidbru and yadaber, that word connotes something soft. But however, when it says daber is a hard language, but yadber is a softer language. So nidbaru is from a different language. So here we have a different usage of the word. So even in the word daber, if it's not daber, it's yadber, some other usage of the word, doesn't connote tough. What specifically connotes strength is daber. So daber is a language of strength. So that's what the Gemara says. The daber is a language of strength, and that's why, since it's the only, the Torah is also referred to as oath, strength. Torah is something it's strong, it's meaningful, powerful. So therefore, the words of the Torah, the only thing that Hashem told Yeshua that he told him to keep, that he told him, he reminded him about a mitzvah that's written in the Torah. This is the only one. So he was talking about Torah. So that's written in the Torah. Torah is oaths, Torah is strength. It's kosher strength, the right strength, and therefore that's that bear is strength. That bear is strong. But yad bear is soft. Yad bear is soft. Yad bear. That bear is strong. That bear is strong. But when it says it's a yud before the bear, yad bear, that's soft. So it depends. How the word is used. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to want to address. We said one of the reasons why we said that it's referred to as daber when he told Yeshua about the mitzvah of Ori Miklat, since it was something that's written in the Torah, and the Torah is the strength of the Jewish people in a certain sense, right? If you want to think about it that way, what's the strength of the Jew? Hakol Kol Yaakov, the power of the Torah. The Torah is our strength, the voice of Yaakov. There's a shul called Kol Yaakov in Brooklyn. Kol Yaakov, right? It's Kol Yaakov, that's the power of the Jew. The davening, the prayer, but the learning, that's the power. So that's called daber. So that's one reason why Hashem referred to, when Hashem speaks to Yeshua about something that's written in the Torah is the strength of the Jew. So that's why he uses the language of strength, of daber. But there's another reason that's given. There's another reason that for some reason Yeshua delayed in the separation of designating cities of refuge. And because Yeshua delayed, Hashem spoke to him in a strong language.
Or maybe the subject was important, Rabbi.
Say that again?
The subject was important for Hashem.
Right, but every subject that Hashem is going to talk to Yeshua should be important. So therefore, why specifically in this instance, when Hashem spoke to Yeshua about other important things, he didn't use the language of daber.
So why do we say that he delayed? Why did he delay? Because it took 7 years and 7 years.
Okay, so that's a good question. Why he delayed, and what was the actual delay? Because here it sounds like after they conquered the land for 7 years, then they divided the land for 7 years. It seems immediately after the division of the land, he should have immediately separated the cities. And for some reason, at that point, it's already 14 years. It's 7 years of the conquering, 7 years of dividing the land. He should have immediately separated those cities. It says, look what the Gemara says. We'll see if we see any commentary on this. The Gemara says, Pligi ba Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. There's a dispute as why the strong language, the daber that Hashem used to Yeshua. Chad Omer, he delayed in separating the Ori Miklat, the places of refuge, and because he delayed, and he waited until Hashem told him to do it, he should have done it without Hashem telling him, because he already knows from Moshe. That's the instruction. So therefore, Hashem spoke to him in a harsher language. And and one says, shel Torah. The other one says, like we said before, the reason why he uses the language of daber, because this is the one mitzvah that Hashem is telling Yeshua to fulfill that's written already in the Torah, and the Torah is strength. Therefore, he uses the language of daber. Now, the Gemara continues, Vayichtov Yeshua. Yeshua wrote Es hadvarim ha'eleh. He wrote these words. This is a pasuk in Yeshua. He wrote these words in the Sefer Torah Elokim. He wrote these words. Now, what are these words that the pasuk is referring to. When it says Yeshua wrote these words, what words are we referring to? So the Gemara says, "Upligi bar Rabbi Yehuda v'Rab Nechemia." There's a machloket of Yehuda and Nechemia. Which words did Yeshua write? B'sefer, hello Akiva, Sefer Torah Elokim. Now you know the last 8 psukim of the Torah talks about the death of Moshe. And there's a Gemara in Baba Batra, who wrote the last 8 psukim of the Torah? Did Yoshua write the last 8 psukim of the Torah? Because Moshe is already, it says that Moshe passed away. Well, Moshe himself is writing, Hashem tells him to write about his own death. That Moshe dies. That every letter of the Torah from Bereshit, from the Beis to the Lamed, the Bet to the Lamed, which is Beis and Lamed are the letters of Lev, the heart. That's the heart of the Hashem wants a person's heart. From the first letter to the last letter, was that all written by Moshe, told to Hashem to Moshe, or was just everything up to the last 8 psukim? So one opinion is going to say he wrote these words, the Sefer Torah Elokim. Which words did he write? The last 8 psukim. Now, when it says in Yeshua that he wrote these words, he wrote this. What did he write in the Sefer Torah Elokim? He wrote the last 8 psukim of the Torah. That is one opinion. And the second opinion, is going to look at the second opinion in a moment. Chad Omer, Shmone psukim. Yeshua wrote the last 8 psukim of the Torah, and that's what it's alluding to in Sefer Yeshua. He wrote the last 8 psukim in the Torah. Chad Omer, and one says Par Ori Miklat. Yeshua wrote in his Sefer, he wrote about, it's connected to the Ori Miklat that we've been talking about, the laws of the cities of refuge that are mentioned in Sefer Yeshua. And in connection with that, it says Yeshua was the one who wrote these words in the Sefer Yeshua. So the Gemara says, if you're telling me that it's referring to the 8 psukim, it makes sense. He wrote in the Sefer Torah Elokim. What is the Sefer Torah Elokim? The Torah is a Sefer Torah Elokim. He wrote these words, these last 8 psukim of the Torah, in the Torah. He wrote the last 8 psukim in the Torah Elokim. But if it says Elaman Diyama Ori Miklat, that he wrote these laws of Ori Miklat in his Sefer. So what does it mean by Sefer Torah Elokim? Well, how do you refer to it as the Sefer Torah Elokim? The Sefer Torah Elokim is usually referred to as the Sefer of the Chumash that we have. So the Gemara says he wrote the laws of Ori Miklat that were from the Sefer Torah Elokim. Ahachikama. The Gemara says, "Vayichtov Yeshua b'sifro." Yeshua wrote in his Sefer, "Es advorim me'ele," the words haktuvim b'Sefer Torah Elokim, the words, the things about Ori Miklat that was written in the Torah itself. He repeated it in his own Sefer, in the Sefer Yeshua. He wrote about these laws that were written in the Sefer Torah Elokim. So that concludes the Gemara today with what is it referred to Yeshua wrote? Was it the last 8 psukim of the Torah? Or the referred to Yeshua wrote about the Ori Miklat in the Sefer Yeshua? I want to wish everyone a great day. Thank you all for joining. Beautiful class, beautiful people.
Beautiful class. Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best, everybody.
Thank you.
Yes. Strong. But El Yoshua. Oh, yeah, very good. That's Yadber, meaning. Yeah, but you're saying you're pointing out a good point. It sounds like even Vayidaber. Yeah, so maybe it would seem that the Vayidaber is coming from the word. The root over there is daber. Vayidaber is, but yadber, the root of have a good day. Maybe over there. You're pointing out the root in the language of vayidaber. Right, but the right, but I see in my Gemara they explain daber or vayidaber is the language that's kosher. Daber or vayidaber, but yadber. Say it again. The Gemara says, look what the Gemara says. Yadber, daber l'chud and yadber l'chud. You see that? You see it? But it's yadber. It's not vayidaber. It's yadber. Yadber is yadber, like the pasuk says. Nidbaru is from the it's yadber. Right, but same letters, but it's pronounced differently, and it means. But the Torah has no vowels, but there is a Masorah, how you read. There's a tradition how you read. Yes. Take care, Yosef. Have a great day.
With